Well, again, I'm glad that you're here this morning, and I'm glad that we are reading through the Gospel according to John together. At least I hope you are. There's plenty of helps to do that. We've got the bookmarks, of course, you can check off. You can get caught up if you're behind, or just start today. That would be fine too. We have the just copies of John itself, just the Gospel of John, out in by the Connections corner. You can have one of those if that's a help to you. And then there's also journals out there that you can use. We've got lots of opportunities, including our ability to write our own handwritten copy of the Gospel according to John. And I've seen some folks take advantage of that. I hope you'll dip into our emerging new prayer room and out in the front lobby and pin a few verses today sometime perhaps, or sometime this week. And do it again. Do it multiple times. It'll be a great opportunity for us to do this together. Jesus says, I am the bread of life. That's how we started this series a few weeks ago. Jesus says, I am the bread of life, the center of our sustenance. Not just what he provides himself, or what he provides, but rather he himself is the sustenance. In him we are beyond just made full, we are in fact satisfied. He is the bread of life. He also says, I am the light of the world, the light of truth and of goodness, which not only pushes back the darkness around us, but pushes back the darkness within us. And we walk in his light if we understand ourselves as being sent by him, sent in his name. Today we hear Jesus saying, I am the good shepherd and the gate for the sheep, because in Jesus we find comfort and meaning and security and joy. The good shepherd is the one who provides and protects the sheep, even at great personal cost. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd, and the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And just like the other I am sayings, this one has great depth in and in reference to the Old Testament. If you were here last summer, we did a series called the Psalms of Summer, and you might remember that we learned, if you didn't already know, Jesus' favorite book of the Bible to quote is in fact the book of Psalms. And so when he says, I am the good shepherd, we can't help but think of the 23rd Psalm, or at least that's what I hope. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepares a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. To say that God is our shepherd, or the Lord is my shepherd, to believe that the Lord is our shepherd means that we believe God will meet our greatest needs. To say that Jesus is in fact the good shepherd is to say that it is through Jesus God meets our greatest needs. And specifically that in Christ we find our comfort and our security, our meaning and our joy. It is not only John's account of the gospel that wants to make sure that we know this. Mark also, the Gospel of Mark also, as it is written, wants us to know that Jesus is the good shepherd of the 23rd Psalm. Mark does it a bit differently. In Mark's telling of the feeding of the 5,000 story, he writes this, when Jesus saw them, he had compassion on them because they were sheep without a shepherd, like sheep without a shepherd. And then we read, then he commanded them to all sit down in groups on the green grass. Let me ask you a question. You ever seen grass that isn't green? Why in the world is that detail included? Well, it's for the same point that Mark writes, not just that Jesus had compassion, but that he had compassion on them, for they were like sheep without a shepherd. And we all know that the good shepherd makes the sheep lie down where? In green pastures. Jesus makes them sit down on the green grass. The gospel writers Mark and John wants us to know the same thing. Jesus is in fact the Lord my shepherd, the 23rd Psalm, that shepherd. The challenge for us to receive such a marvelous good word is that you and I are ferocious consumers. We think we need so much stuff. So it's really difficult for most people to believe the simple but radical message that if God is my shepherd, I shall not want. We live in a society where slick advertising has succeeded in convincing us that things once considered luxuries are now in fact basic necessities. From our earliest moments as children, we learn to want to everything. So we struggle to hear and receive the good news of a good shepherd Jesus, causing us to in fact not want. But that is exactly what both Mark and John are trying to tell us. They invite us to believe and put our faith and trust in Jesus as the good shepherd of the 23rd Psalm, who loves us, cares for us, provides for us, we his sheep, who in fact is not just the shepherd but the gate, the door for the sheep, who would make us lie down and rest and enjoy the gift of life instead of working ourselves to death. The good shepherd who would restore our soul instead of letting the world's lustful appetites desecrate it. Jesus, the good shepherd, leading us not into temptation, which is where we typically head ourselves, but in the path of righteousness for his name's sake, offering to us right relationships, putting us in right standing with God and showing us how to be in right standing with others. Jesus, the good shepherd, protecting us, even if we're in the valley of the shadow of death. We need not fear, for we belong to him now and forever. In the time of Jesus, shepherds would have had anywhere from a half a dozen to a dozen sheep, depending on their wealth. If they'd really done well for themselves, they might have had as many as a dozen and a half sheep, but rarely would a single shepherd try to give care to more than 20 sheep at a time. At that point, you need help. You need sheepdogs, or better yet, another shepherd. The wealthiest sheep owners may have, in fact, hired, as Jesus suggests here, multiple shepherds, or hirelings, as the scripture calls them, looking over about approximately 20 or so sheep. Jesus points out that the one who actually owns the sheep, though, is the one who cares about them and will sacrifice for them, as opposed to the hired hand, who in the midst of danger may abandon the sheep and say, you know what, I'm not getting paid enough for this, I'm out of here. You ever felt like that? Sure. We might have all been in situations where we think the cost is not worth what we're being asked to consider. And so, but then we've also been in places where we've personally invested and sacrificed more. When it's our livelihood, when it's our family, when it's our future, or the future of our children or grandchildren, when it's our church that makes us willing to go further, endure more, because it's ours. We have a sense of belonging. The sheep belong to the good shepherd. It's not just Jesus' job to take care of us. We belong to him. It's a difference. And also in this passage, as I mentioned just a few moments ago, Jesus says not only is he the good shepherd, but he is the gate for the sheep. I've combined them in this morning in this sermon, and both the I am sayings of the good shepherd and the gate for the sheep, because the meanings are so very, very similar, although one perhaps comes across to us as strange. The metaphor of shepherd is used over 90 times in the Bible, but to be the gate of the sheep, what in the world does that mean? Sheep spend their lives traveling in and out of gates. They come in through the gate at night for security and rest. When they go in through the gate, they feel safe and taken care of, and they know that they'll be okay through the night. Inside the pen, they were free from predators and bandits. And in the morning, sheep go through the gate to find pasture and enjoyment. In the pasture, sheep roam and run and feel alive. They eat. The gate leads to joy. In the wilderness of Judea in the time of Jesus, and actually still very much today, shepherds must migrate their herds from place to place. They're constantly on the move to find green pastures. That area is particularly dry, and so for most of the year, they're on the move. And so they need to find or build a pen at night in some form or fashion in order to hold the sheep and protect them. That's part of the job of the shepherd. If they had financial resources, they and they ended up near a small town, perhaps they could rent a pen for the evening. Pens of this time would have sturdy structure with walls and a completely enclosed locking door. Sometimes an owner might even have a watchman who kept the keys and opened the gate in the morning. The other solution, the one that is more common, is that the sheep pens were typically whatever a shepherd could come up with. Usually a configuration of natural earth and rock, maybe close to a cave, supplemented by a few good rocks, perhaps on this side or that, moved strategically, placed by the shepherd. A partial pen, perhaps. Various things, but no matter what the shepherd came up with, there was never a gate. Shepherds didn't carry gates around, so what did they do? It means the shepherd himself would become the gate. The shepherd would lie down at night in the doorway, whatever had been made, however it had been fashioned. And this is what people would have pictured when Jesus says, "I am the door," or the gate for the sheep. A shepherd in the time of Christ risks his life for the sheep as the gate. He's the only thing between them and the wild animals in the wilderness who would have come looking for a meal in the night. The shepherd risks injury and worse in order to keep the sheep safe. He puts his own body in harm's way in order for the sheep to rest easy. He does this because the sheep mean everything to the shepherd. Jesus says, "I am the good shepherd. I am the gate for the sheep." What helps the sheep to lie down? What helps the sheep to rest easy? They see the shepherd in the doorway. They know that between them and the object of their worries sits the shepherd. Their focus is not on all the predators that could come to harm them or devour them, but on the shepherd who stands between them. Archaeologists tell us that shepherding is perhaps the oldest profession in the world. You probably heard it was something else. What's amazing today is how little shepherding has changed. A shepherd does what a shepherd has always done. Every day a shepherd inspects each sheep for parasites and wounds and overall health as they pass from the gate to the field. Each gets individual attention. Then the shepherd calls to the sheep as a group, leading them out to graze. The shepherd leads them to the next place they are to go. They follow him. The notion that sheep are stupid comes from American cowboys who tried to drive the sheep like cows and steer. The sheep would just scatter, terrified, frightened. Cowboys thought that they were stupid animals because of this and found them unprofitable as such. But sheep are not to be driven. Sheep are led. They follow a shepherd. It's a personal relationship. It's intimate. It's not about a herd mentality, or at least it shouldn't be, but an intimate trust of a shepherd that draws you to be one among the flock. Each evening when the sheep are called in by the shepherd, the process that took place in the morning is reversed. This time, also in addition to checking each and every sheep for their health and how they're doing, what else does the shepherd do? Of course, you may do it at night when you have trouble sleeping. You count sheep. The shepherd counts them to ensure that none have been lost. If the count is off, what does the shepherd do? Of course, the shepherd then goes after the lost sheep. In Matthew and Luke's account of the gospel, Jesus tells a parable about the shepherd who leaves the 99 to go after the one that is lost. That's an important shepherd, first of all. He has at least 4 hirelings that is working with him, maybe 5. And yet he doesn't send the servant to go after the lost sheep. He goes after the lost sheep himself and searches and searches and searches, not until he was wore out or until there's nowhere else to look. He searches until he finds the one. This is true. Even though he has 99 others, his priority is the one that is lost. Jesus says to us, that is how God is with us. None of us find God. God is the one who finds us. We sometimes call people seekers. I know I do. It's convenient, makes sense to us. But really, the theological truth is God is the one who is seeking us, calling after us, searching for us, when once again we found ourselves to be lost. Jesus tells a person by the name of Zacchaeus in Luke 19 that in fact his mission is, as the Son of God, to come and seek and save the lost. Some sheep don't know they're lost, but that doesn't mean or keep the shepherd from searching for them. Why do sheep get lost? Because they get so busy grazing with their head down. They just follow the path of good tasting grass until they don't recognize where they are anymore. You ever do that? Do you ever get so caught up in what you're doing and what you think you need that you forget about things that are really more important? You kind of lose yourself in the process. When sheep get lost, they're separated from the herd and they're or the flock rather, and they're in danger. When they are alone, they can be killed by another animal or taken by someone who isn't the shepherd. There are lots of people out there that try to be sheep without being part of a flock. There's a fancy term for this, folks. It's called being lost. That's how the metaphor works. If you're a sheep of Jesus but aren't in a flock somewhere, you're lost. It doesn't matter that you believe that you're a sheep or that you believe in the shepherd. That's how the metaphor works. If you're not in a flock, you're lost. You need to be found. The good news is the good shepherd is looking for you, even if you're currently not interested yourself in being found. But let's be clear enough. Sheep of Jesus, if they're not among other sheep, are still lost. It doesn't work any other way. Today it seems like we have lots of people who don't understand this. They have all sorts of critiques and problems with their last flock, or maybe their current flock. Sometimes they just don't like the other sheep. Maybe the hired hand hasn't done a very good job with them. Particularly, they don't particularly enjoy how the hired hand is shepherding them directly, or they feel he isn't doing it right somehow. But at the end of the day, unless they allow themselves to be put into some flock somewhere by the good shepherd, they're lost. We all need to connect in. One of the biggest lies of our modern culture is that we can be perfectly spiritual alone, that our individual beliefs are enough. Let me tell you, you've never heard that from the Good Shepherd. Make sure you recognize the shepherd's voice, because he's always calling his flock together. He's always calling us back into the pen, sending us out to the field, calling us back. It's the way it works. And as one of his flocks, that's why we always have to remember to create new pens for new sheep. I'm really grateful for our new Sunday school class. It's taken off. It's one of several that we've tried to get going. This one seemed to have stuck and worked, and I'm grateful for it. I'll again encourage you. It's something I've done a few years ago. As a church, we need to try to start a new Sunday school class every year. That's part of how we grow. People connect in. They've got to have a place to gather. And some of our current pens are great, but we've been in those pens for a while. And we need new pens for new people. And so we need new ministries, new ministry opportunities, new small groups, new Sunday school classes. And it takes a very generous church to understand that. It takes a church that wants to cooperate with the shepherd in reaching out and gathering all those sheep who are lost. Sometimes not getting lost is more difficult than others. The problem is magnified when the grass isn't all that plentiful. In Israel, at the end of the summer and into the winter, grassy areas and watering holes are far apart. This increases the danger, and the need increases for the sheep to keep on the move, and with it, the need for the sheep to trust and stay close to the shepherd. Sometimes people abandon spirituality when times get tough. I don't know why, because it seems like that's when you would need it much more. And most people that are already strong in their faith, they do cling to it more. But then sometimes other folks that maybe aren't so strong, or it's just interesting how when times get tough, it's like they run away. When we are long journeys apart from the next watering hole, the next resting place, the next oasis, that's not the time to give up paying close attention to the shepherd. That's when we need him the most. Seems like part of the problem today is it seems like a lot of people only want a shepherd that promises to always keep us in a good place. When the truth is, life doesn't work that way. We need a shepherd because the weather isn't always going to be good. The resources aren't always going to be plentiful. And there's decidedly awful predators roaming about. Sheep need someone to lead them through such to the next good place. and not necessarily make empty promises of how the way it is now will always be this good, but instead to travel through the wilderness and find for us the next green pasture, the next still waters. How important then is it that we learn to hear his voice? Such journeys become immensely more difficult when we realize we don't know his voice well enough. Remember, the sheep hear his voice not because the shepherd is the loudest. It's not because their shepherd is the loudest. They hear his voice because they focus on listening to him. Sheep respond to their shepherd. They recognize his voice. I've read that as many as a half a dozen different small flocks can and often do water together. They just intermix together as they're all trying to get water, and the shepherds don't worry about it. They don't worry about the sheep getting mixed up. They just let them go and drink and mingle and have a good time, I suppose. Because when it's time to move on, each shepherd calls, and that shepherd's sheep leave with him. The sheep know their shepherd's voice. Is the Lord Jesus, the good shepherd, your shepherd? If he is, you want him to be, well, you want to know his voice. Learning his voice isn't all that difficult. It's really just a matter of spending time with him. For most people, I think the problem gets solved that easily. Spend time with the shepherd in his word, in quiet times, and perhaps more importantly, spend time among his flock. After all, you have to believe at the very least the good shepherd is speaking to his flock. So if you're here among them, it increases your chances of recognizing what his voice sounds like. That said, I know some people really struggle with discerning God's voice in their mind or in their heart. I've always said the same thing. You can tell that the Spirit is speaking to you because it sounds like Jesus. I love the words of Jesus. Pay attention to those red letters. You know what I mean, right? Some Bibles used to print the words of Jesus in red. Spend time reading and reflecting upon the gospel messages. Right now we have an opportunity to read through John. Pay close attention to the gospel and specifically the words of Jesus himself. Jesus always sounds like Jesus. It's not just a good idea. It's essential to know the Master's voice. After all, the Good Shepherd isn't the only one that's speaking. We have to learn to hear his voice from all the others that try to pull us away, because their desire is not for our good, but their own. We must recognize the voice of the Good Shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep. Ultimately, that is the story that convinced me. If there is, I've said this many times, if there is a God, sisters and brothers, then why would that God not be this God of Jesus? Is there a better story to be told? If people struggle with belief, if they struggle, is this not the story worth believing in? A story of one who would lay down his own life, who would live in such a way that would inspire us, and then in such a cruel death, when all seems lost, when all things seem to be impossible, he is victorious and overcomes. The shepherd whose voice I'm interested in learning to know is a shepherd who teaches me all things are possible. That death and the grave have not the last word, that love in fact doesn't win, and that this shepherd, in my listening to his voice, can restore my heart, my soul, my life. I can trust in him for my security and my comfort and for the meaning of my life and for joy. He always leads to joy. Learning his voice makes all the difference. Learning his voice always makes the difference. And I'm always amazed at those who would try to live without it. Don't be among them. I'm glad you're part of the flock today. Who else do we know? Who else, whether they understand themselves, and many do, see themselves to be sheep of the Lord, Nonetheless, who else needs to become part of the flock?